Hi, this is Kelsey Cooper, and I'm the host for Disabled Birth Stories podcast. I hope those in the disabled community can enjoy these stories of bringing beautiful babies into the world and the journey along the way. I hope this podcast helps you feel seen, heard, empowered, and capable, no matter your journey to being a parent. I hope those who are able-bodied would listen to empathize with and support their disabled family member, friend, acquaintance, or random stranger. Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us today. After listening to this episode, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please also check the description for our social media links and the link to our merch store. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please consult your medical providers for all of your healthcare needs. Also, the views and opinions expressed by the guests are not necessarily the views and opinions of the host and vice versa. I'm your host, Kelsey Cooper, and I'm here with Christa, and she's going to tell us our stories today. Christa, can you start by introducing yourself?
Hi, my name's Christa, and I'm a 34-year-old quadriplegic from Arizona.
And your stories are a little different because you started motherhood before you were disabled. So can you tell us a little bit about that first pregnancy and getting pregnant and what that was like?
Yes, absolutely. So I got pregnant when I was 19 and I was still able-bodied. I was working as a CNA at the time, so I was on my feet a lot. With my very first pregnancy, it took a really long time to be able to see the bump. I think I want to say I was probably 6 or 7 months before you could even really tell that I was pregnant because I carried him in my back mostly. And then, like I said, I was on my feet a lot. So walking, they say, is supposed to be really good during a pregnancy. So it was a very healthy pregnancy with him, and I carried him until I was about 37 weeks, and my water broke after work one day. I want to say I was in labor with him for about 7 or 8 hours, and I did get an epidural because I could feel everything, not being paralyzed at that point. I could feel all the contractions and all the things that people feel. So I did get an epidural with him, and he was just a normal vaginal delivery for me. But then, I kind of raised him as a single mother. I got paralyzed when he was 2 months old. So I went through the whole rehab process and the whole single motherhood process as a brand new quadriplegic because I broke my neck on a motorcycle ride. Because I had to experience single motherhood, it took a little while for me to find the right person to marry and build a family with. So with my second pregnancy, it was about December 2014 when we got pregnant. I did not get as much morning sickness, but I did realize that I was showing a lot more. And it could have been because he was my second pregnancy, or it could have been because I was sitting. When you're sitting, your stomach bulges out a little bit more. And then as a quadriplegic, I don't have the core muscles in my abdomen. So it could have been a combination of those things. But either way, I was showing probably by the second month. I got really sick with him for probably the first 2 months. And then I did notice a lot of UTIs compared to my first pregnancy. I never got any UTIs with my first pregnancy. So we just had to treat those as we went. I had a specialist from the University of Kansas that was monitoring my care, and I was basically just learning everything as I went. I had been told by doctors in the past that as a quadriplegic, pregnancies needed to be planned because of so much that goes into them. So he was a planned pregnancy, but nobody ever told me that I was at a risk for blood clots and stuff like that. So we found out 6 weeks after I delivered him that I had a really big blood clot in my leg. And so that's when I look at this blood clot that I had in my leg, I delivered him early at 35 weeks because they thought that I had preeclampsia. I mean, all of my labs turned out fine. Everything was fine up until 35 weeks and when I started developing headaches. But just looking back, I'm kind of like, I think it was the blood clot that was affecting my headaches and everything like that. So his labor was relatively easy labor. Even though he was early, he did have to go to the NICU because he was early and his lungs were a little underdeveloped. But I was required to get an epidural just because of my spinal cord injury. They were afraid that I would like have autonomic dysreflexia if I didn't get the epidural.
And was the epidural placement or anything like that discussed before, or did they have trouble with that being a quadriplegic?
It wasn't too bad. So it wasn't the fact that I was a quadriplegic. The thing that made it complicated was that I developed scoliosis, like my second year of paralysis. So my spine was curved. So it made it tricky, but it wasn't impossible.
So did they have to do like x-rays or planning prior to the epidural, or is it just something that happened during the planning of the pregnancy?
Well, when we were going to Kansas City, it was once a month and then twice a month because I was considered high risk as a quadriplegic. And we talked about everything with anesthesia because of my scoliosis, and then like if I was going to have to possibly have a C-section, but I have the Mitrofanoff procedure, which is where you catheterize through your belly button. So we were going to try not to go like C-section or anything. The doctor was kind of like, yeah, you should be fine with the epidural, but it kind of just really boiled down to like when I was in that moment, then the anesthesiologist had to kind of check over it and say, oh yeah, I see you have some curvature to your spine, but it's not too bad. I'm going to talk more about that with my fourth pregnancy because over the years now, I've been paralyzed for 14 years. With my fourth pregnancy, it was like much more of an issue because my spine has gotten like a little bit worse sitting on it the way that I have been for so long.
After the epidural, what was the process like then?
So I had the epidural for a couple hours and they waited for my water to break, but my water didn't break on its own, so they had to break it. And then they told me it could be like 5 minutes before I was probably dilated to like a 5. They were telling me that I could dilate to a 10 within a few minutes or a few hours. They just didn't know. It depends on like how the body responds. So with him, I think it took a good couple hours and I was able to get the Pitocin going through the IV. But the thing that really like sped up the process was using the peanut ball. It's like a big ball that you put between your legs. It's like the shape of a peanut. And they put it between my legs and they were like kind of pushing down on my legs and my pelvis to like get it to widen a little bit. So using that is what really sped it up.
Being quadriplegic, I feel like this may be a question some people have is like, what sensation of pain did you have prior to the episode?
So I'm an incomplete quadriplegic, so I have full sensation. I could feel all the Braxton Hicks. I could feel contractions, but they weren't at all to the severity of they were with my firstborn. It's almost like, as like being pinched, but it doesn't hurt as much as like if you have full sensation, like without a spinal cord injury. So I could feel the contractions. I could see them when like my stomach would tighten and then get loose again and then tighten. So the pain wasn't really that bad, but they also didn't allow me to go very far with contractions because they were so afraid of the autonomic dysreflexia.
With the peanut ball, you were saying you were able to get further along in the dilation?
Yes. So after they broke my water at about 5 centimeters, I couldn't really get past 7. So the nurses were like, hey, let's just try this. So I remember sleeping on my side, or like, sleeping as best I could on my side. And they would come in every 30 to 45 minutes to just like push on it and to check a little bit. So it took about 2 hours from the time that my water broke to the time we like used the peanut ball and were able to get dilated all the way.
With the pushing stage, was there anything different that they had to do because of your paralysis, or was it the typical purple push?
So they did a really good job preparing me for this. The doctor that I met with prior to labor and delivery, I was asking what is this supposed to look like? Like what if I can't push him out? And he said, well, you've already had a child, so your body naturally like knows what to do. I don't know if that's the way it is for like other quadriplegics that are like newly pregnant, like as somebody with a disability. But he told me because I was pregnant prior to this, that my body would just know what to do. So he said, you can push, but even if you don't push, like your body will still get him out. So when it came time to push, I want to say I only pushed for like a minute. I mean, it didn't take much at all. He was a little guy, so he was only about 5 pounds. So it really wasn't much pushing at all for me on my part.
What was immediate postpartum? Did they put him right on your chest, or how did that?
So with him, they took him from me and went right over to the corner of the room where the little bed is. He wasn't breathing very well, so they needed to get a CPAP on him. So I didn't get to hold him until they were like in a safe spot, like they were sure that he was safe and breathing on his own and doing what he was supposed to be doing. I was kind of scared because I couldn't hear him crying when he came out, and my husband kind of went over to look at him, and I was like, what's wrong with him? Is he okay? Is he okay? And he said, yeah, he's okay. But, then once they got the CPAP machine put on his little head and got him all situated, then I was able to hold him for a little bit. I couldn't hold him for very long though, because they had to take him back to the NICU, and because I technically was being cared for as somebody with like high blood pressure, they gave me a medication that made me prone to seizures. So they said, like, you can't hold him for 24 hours because like you might have seizures, and like I couldn't get out of my bed or anything for 24 hours because they had to watch me for seizures because of the preeclampsia.
You said he went to the NICU. How long was he in the NICU?
11 days.
Okay, so in that first 24 hours, was it just your husband going to see him?
We became friends with one of the nurses, and she was able to pull some strings and get him like wheeled into our room a couple times. I mean, he was like attached to the IVs and all the monitors, and they had to bring all the machines with him, but she was able to bring him into the room a couple times. And then basically just my husband going back and forth, taking pictures and everything.
How was the hospital stay? Did you get discharged before he did? And how was the hospital stay post that 24 hours where you could get up and move around?
So I was able to get out of my bed after 24 hours. I believe they discharged me after like, it was either 2 or 3 days. I can't remember, but it was like the normal discharge time. I didn't want to be discharged because I gave birth to him in Kansas City, and we lived like 2 hours away. Because he was in the NICU and I got discharged, we got hooked up with the Ronald McDonald House. So we were able to stay at the Ronald McDonald House in Kansas City and go back and forth to see him instead of driving the 2 hours from home.
So what is the Ronald McDonald House, for those who don't know, like what is allowed there? Are you allowed just to stay like it was your own, like a hotel room, or like what are there requirements and things like that as far as this day?
So the Ronald McDonald House is basically like a hotel. It's really, really nice. They provide meals. You don't have to pay anything, but they rely heavily on donations. So they just say like whatever you can afford, just, whenever. My son was about 5.5. My firstborn was about 5.5 at this time. So he was allowed to come. It was all like mothers of like either newborns in the NICU or mothers of kids with like terminal illnesses that were going to the university hospital or the children's hospital. So it's basically, it's not necessarily for people that are that are low income. It's also for people who like can't travel, like, which is like what our situation was.
What was visiting the NICU, being disabled this time around, like navigating the hospital and then NICU? Was there room for you to get around, and like did they accommodate you as the mother?
Because it was a university hospital, it was really big. The staff was really welcoming. I had a lot of nurses that were helping me learn how to pump, which like I didn't really think about like during pregnancy. Like I was just kind of like, oh, we'll do it when it gets here. But he came early, so I just didn't even think about it until they were like, hey, do you want to learn how to breastfeed? But like I couldn't breastfeed, I had to pump because he had a feeding tube. So I had some nurses helping me with that. There wasn't really the option for me to stay overnight there because there was only like a day bed, like a couch. So my husband could stay there if he wanted to, but it wasn't really like designed for someone who like sits in a wheelchair and needs to like transfer into a specialized bed or anything. But they were really welcoming and accommodating. If I wanted to pick him up, they would pick him up for me, and he was attached to all the cords and stuff, and they would place him in my arms. And I never felt like I was a bad mom for not being able to pick him up, like hooked up to all those tubes.
What was it like finally being able to bring him home and learn about motherhood too, and this disability?
So when we brought him home, it was the most terrifying experience because they put him on an apnea monitor. First of all, when he was in the NICU, he had to pass a car seat test. He had to be able to sit in the car seat for an hour without his like oxygen levels dropping or heart rate dropping. And he failed 2 car seat tests. So by the time he finally passed it, they made the recommendation that he needed to have an apnea monitor because they thought he might stop breathing while he was sleeping. And so they put it on him and they showed us how it works. Like if he stops breathing, the machine would beep really loud, and then they would show us how to like rub on his chest or like check his breathing. And I was just terrified that apnea machine went off twice while we were driving home, and we had to pull over on the side of the road with like all the semis going past us. And I was like, is he breathing? Is he breathing? So it was like a terrifying 2 hours home. But then we had to have him on it for 6 weeks. That whole 6 weeks was just like that thing would go off all the time, only because we found out that whoever hooked it up didn't hook it up correctly. So he didn't even have real apnea episodes. They were just like faulty. So we were, trying to take care of this newborn, but also like monitor his breathing to make sure he didn't stop breathing in the middle of the night or like during nap or anything like that. But then my oldest son was just starting kindergarten because it was August. So it was a lot of like getting used to a newborn, getting used to putting my firstborn in school. But we had a lot of family come to visit, so that support was really needed.
And was there anything that helped you, like mobility-wise, or anything you found, a different crib, whatever it may be, that helped you to make things easier once you were home?
So I had lateral supports, which are basically just like these pads that sit on your side where your ribs are. And so I would put him in a little, I don't really know what they're called, but we called it a rocker. Is just basically like a little baby chair that he would sleep in. We would put that up on top of our bed. So then he would be at the same level as me. And then with the lateral supports, because I don't have the trunk control to like support myself, the lateral supports would help me stay stable while I was trying to pick him up and I wouldn't fall over, you know what I mean? But I was only allowed to do that until he was like a few months old, because then he started like kicking a lot and rolling a lot. So at that time, then I was able to use the pack and play when he became more mobile.
I guess for that one, was there anything that any resources or anything for the second pregnancy that helped prepare you or inform you of anything you can remember?
Well, so like I mentioned before, about 6 weeks after I gave birth to him, we found out that I had a blood clot in my left leg. It went from my ankle all the way up to my pelvis. And I mean, it was like my entire leg. And the doctor said that it had probably been there since I was about 3 months pregnant. So I had it a really long time. And I was like, why did nobody tell me? Like, why my feet were so swollen and my ankles were so swollen. Why did nobody tell me that this was a thing? And my doctor was like, I don't know, like women's ankles and feet swell up all the time when they're pregnant, regardless of wheelchair. So I don't know, like, why your doctor didn't, and I didn't even think to ask for a scan to check for a blood clot because I had never had one before. So that was a learning experience. Now with my next 2 pregnancies after him, I went on blood thinners during my pregnancy and I never got a blood clot again.
Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com.